Good morning. So, just a bit about me. I am Mike. I'm the Global Cyber Threat and Incident Response Manager at Verifone. The War Games is more relevant to a previous organisation, With Me. Part of their model was looking for potential over experience and breaking down the cyber skill shortage and also the entry-level roles being quite difficult to achieve. So part of the model of the business was bringing in people with zero experience, usually from neurodivergent or veteran backgrounds that are slightly more difficult to employ, and giving them the hands-on experience and training that they require to become very competent cyber operators. It's a proven method and it does work. It's also a great way to test your incident response capabilities. And it also means you can offset some of the budget and the requirements based on training, because it's IR for your compliance things, because obviously if you do your yearly tabletop, you can kind of offset things. So the rationale behind it, hands-on training is obviously one of the most critical things for a lot of people, and you will see job requirements that require years of experience in A, B or C, different tooling sets, things like that. And depending on your background and or experiences, it's quite difficult to get that hands-on experience. You might have done a lot of certifications, you might have a lot of theoretical knowledge, but it's getting that hands-on experience and actually developing the skills that you need to grow into your career. It's also a great way to test your processes and procedures. Obviously, you might do the yearly tabletop exercise and you'll pull out one of your playbooks and decide, we'll do ransomware or we'll do a malware outbreak this year, and you're ticking that compliance box, but it's just more of it's for the compliance driving it as opposed to the actual enrichment for junior or entry-level employees. So this way you're getting everyone to sort of test them processes and procedures, and you can identify any gaps, or any weaknesses in a slightly more coherent manner because you're running it through in real time and checking as it goes. Again, I've mentioned it, there's the global cyber skills shortage. By bringing in junior and entry-level people and giving them that hands-on training, it makes it a lot easier to fill them gaps. It also shares the knowledge and reduces skill silos. Again, if you've got, with the skill shortage, it's quite a hot market for cyber professionals. So as a result, you can end up going through quite a few, sort of your turnover can be quite high. And bringing people in and training them up should be seen as an investment as opposed to a burden. And enrichment and development. Again, bringing in junior and sort of entry-level employees and getting them that self-development and actually investing your time in them, which is going to help in the future. So again, the why, training and upskilling. It's one of these things that doing your war games, it's like a controlled environment that you can train and develop people in, but it also gives them that as close to real as possible. Again, as you mature your wargaming process, you can delve further into the sort of how real it is. So initially I'd always start off in like a very sandboxed environment and it's almost spoon-fed, but it's getting that sort of muscle memory in place. And then as you start to expand, you can throw like red herrings into your production environment and things, and it means it's a little bit more difficult for them to actually do the sort of the threat hunting process, or you give them sort of a slightly more arbitrary CTI task to then find and discover and build a profile on. And cross-training. Depending on how your organization is structured, you might have threat hunting functions, you might have threat intelligence functions, and you might have an incident response function. Again, you might be all one team, you might be siloed off. It's great to cross-train and get that experience between everyone. It reduces skill silos. If, for example, you've got one guy who does your CTI and he takes a 2-week holiday, there's potentially a deficit in your squad and you've not got that experience across the board. And again, if you've got entry-level and junior-level employees and you brought someone in as a CTI analyst, they might want to do a little bit more threat hunting, they might find that more interesting, and it's about giving people the opportunity to grow their career and give them that sort of experience and examples of what's out there and the other disciplines. So who's this targeted at? Well, if you're a team leader and manager and you're sort of having issues hiring or looking at retention, or potentially just you're not hiring talent that's hitting the ground running, which is why we see these job adverts that need 6 years experience in anything and you're expected to be an entry-level expert. So again, by doing this and planning these war games, again, depending on your organization, you can run them at different stages of the year, and use it as a sort of, you have keystones or milestones and you can hit every 3 months depending on how sort of intense you want to do it. And you'll watch the individuals grow. Again, if you're an individual contributor, and you're sat there wondering if you can get a little bit more hands-on or you can grow into your career a little bit more, bring this up with your manager or your lead, and Again, the benefit of doing it as an incident response training process is that you can usually get away with mitigating your yearly compliance requirement. So it means it's a little bit easier to get away with sort of the manpower and the time deficit that you're trying to justify. So planning the war games, again, this will be completely unique to most organizations. It's going to be the one sort of try and grow them into the area that's going to be most beneficial for you initially and then potentially broaden out. So as an organization, if you're using industrial control systems or something that are quite bespoke to your industry, there's not going to be that many people who are at a junior level or an entry level or a less senior level who are going to have had experience or exposure to these systems. So you can look to wargame around that sort of system, and it's going to get people up to speed a lot quicker and also, again, strengthen the ranks. Again, there's organizations have different operating systems. You could have IBM's AIX, HP UX, and things like that, again, unless you've been in a large enterprise or a large organization, you're not going to have had much exposure to. So getting that training and getting the hands-on experience of responding to alerts associated with Solaris OS, or even just doing a digital investigation on like a Solaris host that isn't the norm or isn't the sort of, there's not that many documents, or you don't read blog posts about how to do IR on Solaris. It tends to be Linux, Windows sort of systems that people favor. And yeah, ask where your team are feeling weakest. It might be that they do want to explore Linux a little bit more if you're a Windows shop. And again, it might not be completely sort of beneficial to your organization at the time. But getting that skill and keeping people interested, I think, is the hugest thing, because if you can keep driving that passion, you're always going to have people performing better because it's that motivation. And then you've got to find the right moment. Again, this can be somewhat time consuming, and it can be a time constraint for an organization. And depending on how busy, say, your SOC is, you might not have the time to actually sit there and go, well, we need to dedicate a week to this. A lot of organizations have started doing innovation weeks or hack weeks. This would be a great time to do it. It's sort of that time where you can develop and sort of enrich yourself. And this shouldn't be seen as a burden. It's the key to maximize engagement. So if you're doing it, you can get stakeholders from all over the business, especially if you're doing the full cycle, like IR processes and procedures. You can get the threat hunting aspect done. You can get the executives in. So when you get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning because there's a ransomware outbreak or you've lost customer data, and it's getting that simulation to as real as possible. So again, designing your war games. Initially, as I said, I'd start off with a nice sort of very controlled sandboxed environment. It all again depends on how experienced the team you're trying to train up or get exposure to are. If they are completely green or sort of very at the beginning of their journey in their career, I'd say make it as sort of obvious as possible. And it's that spoon feeding process, because we can get the more information you're instilling in them, they'll start to discover the journey themselves as they develop. Again, the opportunity to build your lab can also be your first upskilling or cross-skilling section. Security engineering or DevOps or systems administration tasks, things like that, whilst not maybe necessarily imperative to the role that they're performing. Again, it's broadening that skill set. It's giving them that slightly different knowledge about the systems that they're protecting and looking at them systems in a slightly more, like they have that knowledge to go behind it. And I'd always advocate for infrastructure as code where possible. Once you've spent the time and you've done that big investment at first, you can then just spin things up on sort of queue, which then mitigates the issues later down the line, especially the time issues. So the example I'm going to use today is an all hands. So we're going to test our threat intelligence functions. We're going to train junior threat hunters, our threat intelligence people, and our incident responders. I always like to come up with like a fictitious APT group. It depends on how mature you want to go with it, how sort of abstract you want to be. If you've got a sort of specific industry or your sort of attack surfaces in a certain area, you can tailor it towards that. And it'll basically be sprinkling some technical indicators that you control, or some C2 servers and other technical indicators, and creating some TTPs that associate to this profile. And then getting your entry-level or junior threat analysts to then build up the profile on it. It could be just getting them to write Sigma rules. It could be getting them just to start putting the data into sticks and things like that. Even just entering it into like MISP or their threat intelligence platform, and just getting that hands-on building the profile and working out sort of the different technical indicators and mapping and understanding the TTPs that these threat actors use. Again, attribution was mentioned in the previous call. If you're an organization that wants to perform attribution, which I know many don't because of the time constraint and the costs associated. This would be a great way to start building that skill set and getting people using the diamond model or the pyramid of pain and getting them in from the early levels and sort of in that controlled environment where there's no harm, no foul type thing, and gives people that real time to get into it and understand it. At this point, once the threat intelligence has been conducted, we can start looking at the threat hunting side of things. Again, this will be in a controlled environment. We'll have some file hashes, potentially some IP addresses that we do control. Again, you can just sprinkle them about. And you can get your hypothesis written up. It could be that you know that there's a APT group that are using brute force attacks from stolen credentials. And then they're using ransomware that's Bash shell or PowerShell based. And you can start building your hypothesis of what to look for. You've got a couple of the indicators of compromise. Could be that you've got an email address and things, and you can start to build it and start to hunt from there. And then once you've finished your hunt, you'll start finding the IOCs, you'll find these indicators, you can move into your incident response mode. And you can start to contain and eradicate the threat that's posed to your environment. And again, it's that full cycle. You could do this as a single team of SOC analysts. It doesn't necessarily need to be defined as per function. It's just that was the experience I had at my previous organization. So the example here, I'm going to use APT Clumsy Magpie, who are a Northeast-based threat actor. We know that their TTPs are brute force, phishing, remote system discovery, and data encryption. This is the sort of information we're going to give the CTI guys. We know that they look for publicly exposed services such as RDP and SSH, and they have got PowerShell and Bash scripts. The reason I choose this sort of attack method for the first one, there's a lot of open source Bash and PowerShell based ransomware that has built-in C2 servers. So the barrier to entry and getting this sort of environment spun up is quite low, but it also gives that slightly more real to life threat profile that you can start to work on. So from here, you've got your hypothesis to then build. It could be that your CTI analysts have started building this profile. They've started mapping the TTPs to the attack framework, MITRE. They've looked at our attack surface. They've worked out potentially where the attacker's going to try and get us. And then you hand it out. Again, this area is where you can get these junior guys writing queries, searching for things and just really getting into it with, again, no real time constraints, or it's all about that enrichment, even just understanding the querying language that you're using and how to pull specific hashes, things like that from the files that normally they might have the slightly more senior guys querying, writing the queries and doing these sort of tasks. And then you move into your incident response side of things. Again, this could be one team, it could be a dedicated function. And it's given that slightly more real tabletop exercise. So you're not talking about you're actually doing it, you're going in, you're analyzing the network connections that are coming out on the host, you're looking at what files have been encrypted, for instance, where it's sending its data and things like that. And this all then feeds back into the CTI process, and it's that nice full cycle of the systems. But again, if you sat there at 3 o'clock in the morning and you get a P1 incident and you've lost half your estate to ransomware, it's not going to be the junior guy that's going to be there jumping on and having to dig into it. This is that, it's giving them the chance. Again, whilst you're going through this, you'll have more senior people driving them through, giving them the guidance and just keeping it going. But when you're sat there in the passenger seat, you're not learning. So when it's that it's that slightly more real-to-life experience, and people will upskill a lot quicker. And it's just getting that muscle memory, and they'll start to look for things that potentially they wouldn't have noticed before because they've not seen it. And then you go through your after-action review. Again, if you're running through like your playbooks that you've done your tabletop exercises for 3 years, you've ran the ransomware one 2 or 3 times, and you might realize that there's certain processes that just don't make sense. There might be things that would make sense now. You've got a different tooling set in place, and it could just be that, well, we should do things a little bit differently, or we'll skip this step, we'll move to this step. And it's that real life, you've ran through it, you've tested it, and you know it works, or you know that there's deficits. It could just be the fact that the process and the order, well, let's break this out into sort of different sections and silo it a little bit more, or move it into different bits. How did the games go? So you're getting that review, you're getting that feedback. If the team has sat there going, I learned a lot in this past week, 2-3 days, then you can look to plan to move on to the next one and make it slightly more challenging, slightly more difficult. And then the biggest one is, was there enough support? Because essentially you are just going to drop a load of people who may not have the experience and the exposure into the deep end, and it's either swim or drown type thing. But there you've got to give them that gentle encouragement and support. And if they do need anything, or they need that pointer, guide them in the direction and help them grow themselves and sort of continue on that journey. And it does work. Again, previous organisation, we had a team of 8 or 9 security analysts that had no prior experience in tech, cyber security, anything like that. They'd done a couple of online courses, and then the organisation brought them in, and within 2 or 3 months, they were starting to get their feet wet and they were getting quite confident. But after 6 months, they were more than happy to jump into incidents. The threat intelligence guys were building out profiles on APT groups and looking for attribution. Our threat hunting team were tearing into different web tokens and other quite sort of sophisticated attack methods that were prevalent at the time and within our environment. And then the incident response guys are running these tests. They're pulling host data. They're looking at reverse engineering malware samples, and they're getting into that process of how does it work. Again, a lot of organizations, they may have just been, churn tickets, pass it up. And this is that letting them get in, they're too stuck into it. Again, there's always that safety barrier of a senior member of the team to jump in if there is an issue, but people will grow at an exponential rate. And once you've got that drive and that sort of hunger for it, they'll continue to grow. Any questions?
Excellent. Right. Questions? Who's got hands up? Ooh, we'll start at the bottom because it's easier.
Hi, great talk, by the way. I do really agree with you on creating tabletop exercises and lab environments, but as a business leader, an experience that we've had is we'll pay thousands of pounds a year, and we still do, for training and lab environments, pay extra for lab environments, and they don't get used. And you'll have people sometimes in the tech team that'll just totally not be engaged with the labs at all. They're interested in theory. It's a massive problem. I thought it was just us. These people are good at the jobs. They're not bad. And I spoke to other people in the same situation as me, and they're like, yeah, what is that all about? You go to these conferences and they'll say, we want lab environments, you want practical training, you provide it, and it's just totally disengaged with. So I'm just wondering what your opinion is on that, and whether you think it should be worked into KPIs, or if it's enforced, is it then more disinteresting?
So for me, it was always if you've got the right people. So again, we've got, my team was built up of a lot of ex-veterans and things that are second, third, maybe even fourth careers at this point. And they've got that hunger, they've got that drive, and they've got that passion to really grow into an industry that they find fascinating. And I think a lot of it is if you've got the right people and they've got that sort of drive and passion, they'll be chomping your arm off for these labs. They'll be wanting more. They'll be wanting to do different things. I mean, we used to do digital forensic disk image hunts, and I would come up and create different random, it was like stealing cupcake recipes, and these bad guys have got the world's secret cupcake recipe. Please analyze the disk image and pull it. And they'd be sat there, and within the next 2 to 3 days, they'd be like, oh, I need another one. Can you make it? And they take a lot of time to make, so it's kind of you're churning through them. But once you've got that passion, that drive, I think, again, I've seen the online learning resources in the labs that haven't been used by a lot of companies. And it depends on if you're using it as your yearly compliance training and you're having to drive it that way. But it also depends on the content. If the content is good and engaging, I do find that people will sit there and spend the time. But it's also that if the time's made out of their own personal time, they might not want to spend an extra 2 hours in a lab a day. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's the right place then.
Hi. So I run an online education platform for people interested in getting into cyber. And I was wondering if this kind of approach could be useful in a kind of virtualized environment for people where it's not actually a company that's working on it, but could be a completely fictitious scenario, completely virtualized, potentially run over something like a Zoom call.
Yeah, it wouldn't be anything dissimilar to like Blue Team Labs, but on a sort of scale where you're multiple people working on the same thing and mentoring. And I think the biggest thing is the mentorship, because if you were to give people these scenarios and situations and just drop them in it, they do need the guidance and the sort of, here's where to look, but it's also when to not give them that bit. If you can give them that nugget of information and they have to then discover it themselves, they're going to discover it a lot quicker or in their own way. Because again, everyone learns in a different manner. It could be that someone really likes getting presentations and speaking and listening. It could be that they are a hands-on doer. And when you're in that process of doing things, people learn, and it's every individual is going to be a different use case, and it's kind of knowing who your audience are to some extent.
Thank you. Another question over here.
I think you raise a really important point there about the mentorship and kind of the instructor or kind of the guidance of the class or the trainees. What are the tips on picking the mentor or developing the mentors? So I guess in my experience, a lot of the really good practitioners almost do this out of an innate or natural ability and therefore struggle to then pass that process or that skill on to someone else. They know what they do, but they don't know how they do, so that makes it hard to teach.
Again, I think it's all on, it's difficult because I know what you mean. There are some incredibly talented technical people, but it's kind of, they've been doing it that long. It's just, oh, how would you not know this? And I think there's that, again, work out how the team likes to learn. And it could even just be a case of shadowing. Okay, so I'm going to spend the next 2 hours doing this. Do you want to just sit on, ask questions as I go? And you've got that live process, which might be a little bit easier for someone who doesn't necessarily understand what they're doing is a lot more complicated than they make it look. Again, I've seen that where you'll sit on a call for 3 or 4 hours as you're just doing the generic stuff and people are like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing this? What's the reason behind this? And as you go, they're like, oh, okay, I wouldn't have thought of that. And it's just them little bits of when they're watching it in real time, they can go, that's how that makes sense and how it's pieced together.
Excellent. Any more questions for Mike? Oh. Right. Oh, you're closer.
Just listening to the previous questions, I think maybe it's if the person's on site with you, it makes it a lot easier to actually ask the question, and the contact is probably the key thing because it breaks down barriers, whereas online and in a virtual environment, it's hard to pick up the phone or like just say, can you look at this for me?
So I'm not proud to say this, but I actually got into this argument on Twitter not too long ago. And it was on about how someone was complaining about the remote world and they can't mentor and their staff are sort of stifled, their employees are just not growing. And I think it's a load of rubbish. I think, fair enough, turning around in the office chair and being like, oh, how do I do this? It's a little bit easier. But again, it's all about knowing the people that you're targeting. So if you've got someone who will sit and read a technical document and they'll sit there and just engross themselves in it and pick it up, that's great for them. It might be that someone else needs to sit on a call with you and have it talked through. They take that presentation. And I think there's no one size fits all. And I think there is limitations in doing things remotely in terms of that initial gratification and that initial feedback. But if you prepare and plan things in advance, you can sit there and go, well, where are you weakest? Let's jump on a couple of calls this week. We'll sit down, we'll go through it. And it's just about that continually growing and trying to nurture the talent. But again, everyone's different. So it could be that someone doesn't want 2 or 3 calls a week. They just want to get a task to get stuck into and then just they'll ask questions as they go. And I think it's that finding that balance between where it becomes cumbersome to try and customize a sort of training plan for everyone in your team to making it as sort of broad and accessible to everyone. But I think just being there, like if you're always at the sort of the end of the Teams, Slack, whatever messaging chat you're using, and they can get that initial, oh, I need this, oh, well, here you go, here's where to look, or here's who you should speak to, and it's just continually sort of communication with them will help.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a good idea to pull people that are remote into one place and do one of these things. But similarly, if you are going to have an incident at 2 a.m. and people normally work all over the country, then they should practice being able to do it remotely because they can't be in the same room. They're not going to be.
Thank you. I'm an apprentice, so I'm very much on the receiving end of all this training. So whenever my company decides to trial a new product, we always go through a CTF with it to just see how it feels. How do CTFs differ from doing war games and such when it comes to this sort of thing?
It's a similar sort of process. I think the wargaming's more for it's that real life simulation. I know Capture the Flags can be somewhat real, but at the same time, you're kind of playing a game, because you're hunting for the flag in a lot of respects. And with the wargame, it's trying to, again, start off in a sort of spoon-fed, very controlled, very obvious manner. But as you start to mature the process, it'll be, you've thrown a couple of rogue servers up in your production environment that have this magic binary that's running and doing things that's, again, tightly controlled. And I think it's just giving that it's trying to simulate what the tabletop exercise would do, just in a more practical and technical manner than talking it through and sort of verbalizing it. It's actually doing it.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Awesome.
Okay, can we get a massive round of applause for Mike?
Thank you.